The sun had barely risen over the jagged cliffs of the Arizona mesas, casting the desert in gold and copper, when Ryland crossed road into the dry wash, his horse kicking up small clouds of dust that shimmered like heat waves in the early light. He was alone, his boots dusty, spurs jingling faintly with each step, the leather of his coat creaking as he shifted in the saddle. The air smelled of sage and sun-baked earth, mingled with the faint metallic tang of distant iron. Ahead, a cluster of warriors had gathered in the shallow canyon, 12 men in traditional garb, painted faces glinting in the morning light, each carrying weapons that had been handed down through generations. At the center of the circle stood the Apache girl herself, tall and striking, her black hair catching the sunlight, eyes scanning the horizon as if daring the world to make a move. The desert wind swept through the canyon, stirring the sand and whispering through the sagebrush, carrying with it a tension that was thick enough to taste. Ryland slowed, feeling the weight of their gaze before they even noticed him. The echo of hooves and soft rustle of cloth amplified in the stillness of the canyon. Every instinct screamed caution, every muscle tense, not in fear, but in reverence for the power gathered in that circle. The warriors eyed him, shifting slightly, their hands brushing spears and bows, the scrape of leather against hardened boots sounding like distant thunder. Ryland dismounted slowly, the rein slack in his hands, boots crunching against sun-baked dirt as he approached the circle. The girl's gaze fixed on him immediately, and the air seemed to shiver with recognition, though no words passed between them. Dust spiraled in small tornadoes around the warrior's feet as the wind carried the whisper of anticipation, the canyon holding its breath. He could see the tension in the men's shoulders, the unspoken rules of honor and challenge etched into the lines of their faces. Ryland's eyes swept the group, noting the strength and skill in each man, but always returning to hers, the one woman whose presence could command 12 seasoned warriors to wait, pause, and ultimately defer. A hawk cried from high above, the sound slicing to the still air, and in that instant, the world seemed to slow, the sun glittering off metal, the heat rippling over rocks, the scent of desert sage and sweat. He exhaled slowly, aware that the first move in his dance would not come from strength or speed, but from understanding. The girl tilted her head slightly, and in that small motion, Ryland felt the weight of destiny's shift. She had noticed him, the outsider, and the 12 warriors were suddenly part of a story that only he could write. The canyon waited, silent but alive, as if the desert itself had paused to witness what would come next. The canyon seemed to stretch and breathe with the heat of morning sun, each rock and sand grain alive with anticipation, as Ryland Cross stepped closer to the circle of 12 warriors. His boots pressed into the sun-baked earth, the saws crunching softly beneath him, and his fingers brushed the worn leather of his rifle, feeling the comforting weight of it against the tense air. The warriors shifted imperceptibly, the faint clink of metal and scrape of leather marking the rhythm of a silent dance, each movement calculated and precise. The Apache girl's eyes never left him, golden and unwavering, her posture commanding the canyon like a flame against shadow. The desert wind carried the scent of sage, dust, and the faint iron tang of sweat, wrapping around him, a living force that pressed the gravity of the moment into his chest. He could feel the heat rising from the ground, the sun burning his neck. Yet it was her gaze that ignited a fire he could not ignore, the intensity of it holding in the stillness that felt like both punishment and grace. He halted at the edge of the circle, allowing the warriors to study him, noting the unspoken hierarchy, the subtle cues of respect and readiness. The girl's hand lifted slightly, a signal more commanding than any spoken word, and the 12 men froze like statues carved from the canyon itself. Dust swirled in miniature tornadoes around their feet, the sunlight catching flecks of metal on shields and weaponry, painting them in gold and bronze. Ryland exhaled slowly, sweat stinging his eyes, muscles taut yet controlled, and realized that the challenge before him was not a force but presence, courage, and understanding. Each warrior's eyes held a question, a test. Who was worthy of her favor? And yet, the girl's gaze had already chosen, locking on him alone, pulling him into a story larger than himself. The air seemed to vibrate with unspoken words, the canyon echoing with the quiet thunder of destiny waiting to unfold. The wind whispered through the sagebrush, the distant call of a hawk punctuating the silence, and Ryland felt a shiver of clarity. This moment would define more than his survival. It would shape the bonds of respect, honor, and perhaps even the strange, undeniable pull between two souls amid the desert's vast emptiness. The girl's eyes softened fractionally, acknowledging him, and the warrior's tension relaxed ever so slightly, a subtle shift that spoke of acceptance and patience. Rylan exhaled again, his heart pounding in rhythm with the desert, and the canyon seemed to lean in closer, as if holding its breath for what the next heartbeat might bring. He knew then that the first move had been made, not by sword or gun, but by a gaze that carried the weight of choice and the promise of change, leaving the desert silent yet alive with possibility. By midday, the desert sun had climbed high, turning the canyon floor into a blistering expanse of gold and copper that shimmered with heat. Rylan Cross crouched near the edge of the circle, rifle in hand, boots digging into the sun-baked dirt, every muscle coiled and ready. The 12 warriors watched him like predators, eyes sharp and calculating, each one a silent judge in this unspoken trial. Their painted faces, the gleam of metal on bows and spears, and the tightness in their stances all spoke of skill, discipline, and unyielding loyalty. And yet, it was the Apache girl at the center who held the true command. She was tall, her black hair catching the sunlight, garments fringed and swaying with the desert wind, eyes locked onto Rylan as though reading the lines of his very soul. The canyon air shimmered with tension, the wind stirring dust into miniature whirlwinds that curled around their feet like living ribbons. Even the distant cry of a hawk, piercing and urgent, seemed to acknowledge the gravity of the moment. Rylan shifted slightly, letting his boots crunch softly on the dry earth, feeling the rhythm of the desert beneath him. He studied the warriors, noting their subtle cues, each slight pivot, hand near weapon, stance tightened for motion, but his gaze always returned to hers. The girl's presence radiated authority, a quiet power that subdued 12 skilled men without a word. The canyon walls amplified the silence, every whisper wind, every scrape of leather, every faint rattle of metal magnified in the oppressive heat. Rylan's pulse raced, sweat running into his eyes, the sun burning his neck. Yet the focus in her gaze grounded him, gave him purpose amid the danger. He exhaled slowly, feeling the rhythm of the desert sync with his heartbeat, a strange clarity settling in. The challenge before him was not strength, but understanding, patience, and courage. A sudden shift, a step forward from one of the warriors, made him freeze. The girl's hand lifted sharply, and the men fell back into line instantly, their unity absolute. Rylan realized that every action was measured, every movement under her scrutiny, and that she alone would determine who was worthy of her hand. Dust spiraled in the sunlight, catching the glint of metal, painting the canyon floor in gold and bronze. Rylan's heart thundered in his chest, the weight of destiny pressing against him like the canyon walls themselves. The warriors waited, she waited, and for a heartbeat, time itself seemed to pause, leaving only the silent exchange of will and courage. He knew the first trial had begun, and that every choice he made from this moment forward would be watched, weighed, and remembered by 12 warriors and the one woman whose gaze could command them all. The heat of the afternoon pressed down on the canyon, the sun turning every rock and grain of sand into molten gold, yet the tension in the circle seemed to burn even hotter. Rylan Cross crouched low, rifle in hand, boots pressed into the dry dirt, listening to the subtle rhythm of life around him, the whisper of the wind through sagebrush, the soft scrape of leather on hardened boots, the faint rustle of a horse shifting its weight. Every detail was magnified, every sound a herald of potential action. The 12 warriors remained statuesque, eyes sharp, muscles coiled, but all deferred to the girl at the center. She was the axis of the desert, the fulcrum upon which the judgment of this trial balanced. Her gaze, unwavering and intense, held Rylan as firmly as any rope, and for a moment he felt the desert shrink, the canyon walls narrowing around the electric tension that pulsed between them. Dust spiraled at the warrior's feet, catching sunlight and glinting off metal in 1,000 tiny points, a shimmering halo that made the scene feel like something out of legend. Rylan adjusted his stance, letting the rifle rest lightly in his hands, every movement deliberate, measured, showing respect but also courage. The girl's eyes never left him, reading, calculating, commanding. He could see the subtle signals she sent, the tilt of her head, the flick of her wrist, the imperceptible shift of weight, and how instantly the warriors responded, their unity absolute. The canyon seemed alive, vibrating with anticipation, each grain of sand echoing the weight of what was at stake. His pulse matched the rhythm of the desert itself, each beat a reminder that the first step in this trial would determine not only his fate, but the respect of 12 skilled warriors in the favor of the one who had already chosen him in her mind. A hawk screamed from high above, the sharp cry slicing through the heat, and Ryland felt it as both warning and omen. The warriors shifted slightly, the girl's hand raised in a small, commanding gesture, and the circle tightened imperceptibly, a living trap of discipline and watchfulness. He exhaled slowly, feeling sweat sting his eyes, the heat burning his neck. Yet he also felt an exhilarating clarity. He understood that strength alone would not win this trial, that courage, patience, and the willingness to meet her gaze unflinchingly were the true tests. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the canyon floor, and the girl's eyes softened fractionally, acknowledging him without words. Ryland felt a surge of determination. The first challenge had passed silently, yet the air vibrated with the promise of trials still come, the desert holding its breath for the next move in a dance of honor, respect, and destiny. The sun had begun its slow descent, painting the desert canyon in molten gold and fiery amber, and Ryland Cross moved cautiously along the sun-baked rocks near the cabin, rifle resting lightly in his hands. The 12 warriors remained in their circle, statuesque and disciplined, but every subtle movement, the tilt ahead, the shifting of weight, the glint of spear in sunlight, reminded him that their patience was a weapon as deadly as any bullet. At the center of it all, the Apache girl stood tall, her black hair flowing in the desert wind, golden eyes locked on Ryland as if measuring his very soul. The canyon air shimmered with heat. The scent of sage and sun-baked earth thick and intoxicating. Even the faint call of a hawk overhead seemed magnified, sharp and precise, slicing to the otherwise perfect stillness. Ryland's boots crunched against the dirt as he adjusted his stance, aware of every heartbeat, every breath, every whispered movement of sand stirred by the wind. He realized that the desert itself was watching, holding its breath, waiting for the dance of wills to begin. The girl shifted slightly, and the warriors responded like shadows stretching across the canyon floor, their unity absolute. Dust swirled at their feet, catching sunlight and turning the ground into a shimmering mosaic of gold, bronze, and shadow. Ryland exhaled slowly, the sweat stinging his eyes, the heat pressing down on his shoulders, and yet he felt a clarity that made the desert seem almost alive in its silent instruction. He could feel the rhythm of the canyon, the cadence of the warriors, and the subtle pulse of her presence, which seemed to dictate the flow of every motion. Every instinct screamed caution, yet he was drawn toward her gaze, compelled by an invisible force stronger than fear. This was no ordinary confrontation. It was a test of perception, courage, and understanding, a silent trial written into the sands of the desert long before he had arrived. Ryland stepped forward, slow and deliberate, boots crunching softly in the dust, rifle lowered in respect, yet ready for the unforeseen. The girl's gaze held him in place, unwavering and exacting, and the circle of warriors tightened imperceptibly, the desert vibrating with anticipation. Shadows stretched long and trembled under the setting sun, dust curling in miniature whirlwinds at their feet, and the canyon seemed to pulse with the rhythm of this standoff. The first step had been made, yet the trial had only begun. Every heartbeat mattered, every subtle shift in posture a language in itself, and Ryland understood that the desert, the warriors, and the girl at the center would decide his fate long before a shot was fired. The sun dipped lower, and the canyon whispered challenges yet to come, leaving him suspended between fear, honor, and the magnetic pull of a gaze that had already chosen him. The canyon deepened into shadow as the sun dipped closer to the horizon, turning the desert into molten bronze and darkening the edges of the jagged cliffs. Ryland Cross crouched near the cabin's corner, rifle resting in his hands, every muscle coiled like a spring, his breath steady though his pulse pounded in rhythm with the heat of the desert. The 12 warriors remained statuesque, their eyes sharp, bodies taut with anticipation, yet the focus of all was the Apache girl at the center, her posture regal, hair and fringed garments flowing in the wind, golden eyes burning with command. Dust swirled at their feet, catching the fading light and shimmering like tiny sparks across the canyon floor, and the faint metallic glint of spears and shields mirrored the intensity of the moment. The canyon itself seemed to hum with tension, every rock and grain of sand alive in the suspended anticipation of what was about to unfold. Ryland felt the desert pressing against him, watching, waiting. Yet the woman's gaze held him even more firmly, compelling him to move with care, with respect, with courage. He shifted slightly, letting the rifle rest lightly in his hands, testing the rhythm of the canyon, feeling the pulse of the warriors, the silent energy of the circle, and most importantly, the unwavering presence of the girl. A hawk cried above, slicing the heavy air with its sharp note, and Ryland felt it echo in his chest like an omen, a reminder that every step mattered. The warrior's eyes flicked towards subtle cues from her, each movement coordinated with the precision of a living machine. Yet she alone dictated the flow, her authority absolute. The desert wind carried the scent of sage and sun-baked earth, dust and grit stinging his face, reminding him of both danger and clarity. Each exhale seemed magnified in the silence, each heartbeat a drum counting down the moment when courage, respect, and skill would collide with destiny. Then she raised a single hand slowly, deliberately, and the circle shifted in unison, a ripple that spoke louder than words, tightening the formation like the desert itself had drawn a line in the sand. Ryland felt his heart surge, sweat stinging his eyes, yet a strange calm settled over him. He understood then that this was not a battle of weapons, but of understanding, of perception, of meeting her gaze unflinchingly and earning the unspoken respect of 12 seasoned warriors. Shadows stretched long across the canyon. Dust spiraled in small tornadoes around the warriors' feet, and the golden light painted the desert with both beauty and danger. The girl's eyes never left him, and Ryland knew that every choice he made from this moment onward would echo in the canyon, a silent testament to courage, patience, and the trials yet to come. The sun sank lower, spilling molten gold and crimson across the desert canyon, turning every rock into a glowing monument of fire and shadow. Ryland crouched behind the cabin, rifle loosely held in his hands, boots pressing into the sun-baked dirt, pulse thrumming like a drum in sync with the desert's heat. The 12 warriors remained in their circle, their eyes sharp and unyielding, every muscle taut with discipline, yet all deferred to the girl at the center, her presence radiating authority that even the sun seemed to acknowledge. Her golden eyes fixed on Ryland with a piercing intensity that made the wind seem still and the dust hang suspended in the air. Every detail around him, the whisper of sage in the breeze, the soft scrape of leather against hardened boots, the faint metallic glint of weapons, amplified the tension that hummed like electricity across the canyon floor. He could feel the weight of destiny pressing against him, heavier than the rifle in his hands. Yet the magnetic pull of her gaze drew him forward with a power stronger than fear. The warriors shifted imperceptibly, responding to subtle movements of her hand and tilted her head, their unity flawless and intimidating. Dust spiraled in the wind, catching the last rays of sunlight and casting glimmering highlights across shields and spears, transforming the desert floor into a mosaic of gold and bronze. Ryland exhaled slowly, letting the rhythm of his heartbeat sync with the pulse of the canyon, aware that the trial before him was not a test of bullets or brute strength, but of perception, patience, and courage. Every step he considered, every small movement, could trigger chaos or earn respect. The girl's eyes remained unwavering, measuring, commanding, and yet somehow inviting him into a silent dialogue that transcended words. Even the faint cry of a hawk overhead seemed to punctuate her authority, slicing through the tension like a knife and reminding him that the desert had its own rules. He stepped slightly forward, careful and deliberate, boots crunching softly against the sun-baked earth, feeling the eyes of the 12 warriors track his motion with predatory precision. The canyon itself seemed alive, shadows stretching long across the jagged rocks, dust curling into small tornadoes around their feet. The girl's hand lifted slowly, signaling subtle shifts in the circle, and the warriors responded instantly, tightening their formation with unspoken discipline. Ryland felt his pulse quicken, but also a clarity he had not known before. The desert, the warriors, and the girl at the center demanded respect, courage, and understanding above all else. The canyon held its breath, the wind whispering through the sagebrush, and the golden light kissed the rocks as if illuminating the path of destiny. He knew the next move would define not only his survival, but also the recognition of 12 warriors and the favor of the one whose gaze had already chosen him. The desert waited, silent yet alive, and Ryland could feel the weight of the challenge tightening like a noose around the canyon walls, demanding the courage to act with honor. The canyon deepened into shadow as the sun hovered near the horizon, casting jagged cliffs into molten reds and darkened silhouettes. Ryland Cross crouched behind the cabin's corner, rifle in hand, every muscle coiled, sweat stinging his eyes, the heat pressing against his neck like a living weight. The 12 warriors formed a flawless circle, disciplined and unmoving, yet their focus remained entirely on the Apache girl at the center, her posture regal, hair and fringed garments flowing in the wind, golden eyes burning with command and scrutiny. The desert wind stirred dust into miniature whirlwinds at their feet, the sunlight glinting off metal weapons and shields, casting flickering patterns across the canyon floor. The canyon itself seemed to hum with anticipation, alive with tension, as if every grain of sand bore witness to the standoff, every echo amplified by the walls of rock surrounding them. Ryland felt the weight of history, honor, and challenge pressing against him, yet he was compelled forward by the strength of her gaze, the unspoken challenge that demanded courage, understanding, and respect. He shifted slightly, adjusting his stance, allowing the rifle to rest lightly in his hands, conscious of every heartbeat and every whisper of the wind. The girl's eyes remained unwavering, commanding the warriors with subtle gestures, a flick of the wrist, a tilt of the head, and the 12 men responded instantly, their unity absolute. Each motion seemed choreographed by her will, the desert bending around her authority. Dust spiraled into the fading sunlight, creating a shimmering veil that transformed the canyon floor into a living mosaic of gold, bronze, and shadow. Ryland exhaled slowly, grounding himself in the rhythm of the canyon, realizing that survival here depended not on bullets or speed, but on the ability to meet her gaze, to earn her recognition, to demonstrate courage tempered by understanding. A hawk cried overhead, the sharp note cutting to the oppressive stillness, and Ryland felt it resonate in his chest like a warning and an omen. Slowly, deliberately, the girl lifted a single hand, signaling a subtle shift in the warriors' formation. The circle tightened, a living force of discipline and anticipation, and Ryland's pulse thundered in response. Every step, every movement mattered. The desert demanded precision, and she dictated the rules. Shadows stretched long across rocks and sand, dust twisting the wind, and for the first time, Ryland felt a strange clarity. The trial was no longer about proving skill or strength. It was about presence, courage, and the ability to earn the trust and respect of the woman who had already seen him beyond the circle of warriors. The canyon seemed to hold its breath with him, waiting for the next action, the next choice, the next heartbeat that would define not only his fate, but the acknowledgement of 12 warriors and the favor of the girl who had already claimed the center of the desert as her own. The sun hung low over the canyon, spilling molten gold and deep amber across jagged cliffs, turning every rock into a glowing monument of shadow and light. Ryland Cross crouched at the edge of the cabin, rifle loosely held in his hands, boots pressed into the sun-baked dirt, every muscle coiled with tension. The 12 warriors remained in their disciplined circle, eyes sharp and unyielding, their painted faces reflecting the fading sunlight like living statues. Yet all focus was drawn to the Apache girl at the center. She stood tall, her black hair catching the last rays of sunlight, golden eyes blazing with command, garments swaying with the wind, as if the canyon itself bent to her authority. Dust swirled at the warriors' feet, catching the light in miniature storms that danced across shields, spears, and bows. Even the faint call of a hawk above seemed magnified, slicing to the canyon air like a sharp note of warning. Ryland felt every heartbeat, every breath, magnified by the desert, yet her gaze drew him forward, compelling him to act with courage tempered by understanding. The warriors shifted slightly, subtle motions dictated by the tiniest flick of her hand, the tilt of her head, the unspoken language of command and obedience. Ryland exhaled slowly, sweat stinging his eyes, muscles taut yet controlled, realizing that the trial before him was not of weapons or brute strength, but perception, patience, and presence. Every movement mattered, every step a potential misstep that could turn the canyon into chaos. Dust spiraled around their feet in the shimmering heat, the sunlight reflecting off metal and bone, to create a living tapestry of gold, bronze, and shadow. He adjusted his stance, boots crunching softly, rifle resting lightly in his hands, aware of the rhythm of the desert, the cadence of the warriors, and the pulse of the woman who had already chosen him in her silent, commanding way. A hawk cried above, sharp and urgent, and Rylan felt an echo in his chest, a reminder that the desert was alive, patient, and exacting. The girl's hand rose slowly, deliberately, signaling a shift, and the warriors moved with flawless precision, tightening the circle while never losing sight of him. Ryland's pulse thundered, but he felt clarity emerge from the tension. Strength alone would not earn her favor. Only courage, respect, and the ability to meet her gaze unflinchingly would tip the balance. The canyon seemed to hold its breath, shadows stretching long across rocks and sand, dust twisting the air, waiting for the next move. Ryland knew that whatever came next would define not only his survival, but the acknowledgement of 12 warriors and the favor of the woman who had already claimed the center of the desert as her own. The desert whispered, alive with anticipation, as the final trial began in the fading golden light, every heartbeat a drum calling him toward destiny. The canyon held its breath as the sun dipped behind jagged cliffs, casting molten gold, crimson, and deep shadow across the desert floor. Ryland crossed it near the cabin, rifle lowered, boots pressed into the sun-baked dirt. Every muscle tense yet steady, his eyes locked on the Apache girl at the center of the circle. The 12 warriors had frozen, their discipline absolute. Yet all attention was drawn to her, to the quiet authority that radiated from her like heat from the sun. Her golden eyes blazed with command, hair and fringed garments flowing with the desert wind. Yet there was a softness now, a subtle acknowledgement that seemed to reach across the canyon to him. Dust spiraled at their feet, glinting in the fading light, reflecting off metal weapons and shields, casting flickering patterns across the ground. The canyon itself seemed suspended in the moment, alive with tension, echoing the silent drumbeat of destiny that vibrated through every grain of sand, every breath of wind. Slowly, deliberately, the girl raised her hand, and the 12 warriors shifted in unison, tightening the circle one last time, a living testament to discipline and respect. Ryland exhaled, the sweat stinging his eyes, feeling the heat pressing down on his neck and shoulders, yet clarity surged through him like a flash of sunlight across the cliffs. He understood the trial had never been about skill or strength. It was about courage, presence, and the ability to meet her gaze with honesty and resolve. Every movement mattered, every heartbeat counted, and for the first time, he felt the desert itself acknowledge his intent. The girl's eyes softened fractionally, a nod of recognition that rippled across the circle, and the warriors relaxed imperceptibly, the tension melting like shadows into the desert heat. Ryland lowered his rifle completely, feeling the extraordinary weight of relief and awe wash over him. She walked toward the cabin, slow, deliberate, commanding yet calm, until she stopped just short of the threshold, her gaze never leaving his. "You've earned their respect," she said softly, voice carrying across the canyon. "And the deserts." The wind stirred, lifting dust and sand into the fading light, and for a heartbeat, the world felt still. The warriors shifted once more, their formation dissolving into casual yet vigilant ease. The circle of challenge broken, replaced by mutual acknowledgement. Ryland felt a surge of gratitude, wonder, and exhaustion, the canyon whispering a silent approval, as if the desert itself had passed judgment and found him worthy. Shadows deepened as twilight claimed the cliffs, yet warmth lingered in the golden light, and in that moment, the unspoken connection between two souls, tested by discipline, danger, and courage, was cemented forever. The desert had delivered its verdict, and Ryland knew that honor, respect, and love could coexist even in the harshest of landscapes.